So when we see the first European settlers come to Canada, what we see is mainly impoverished Europeans, more people that were literally desperate to leave England and find a better home, or desperate to leave France and find a better home, a better way of life. So they would sail across the Atlantic Ocean with no money, very little food. This is where the scurvy came from, because people were so impoverished that their teeth and things would begin to rot. That's why they were sucking on lemons, or why people have been referred to as lemon suckers to try and prevent scurvy. So it's a very derogatory term, referred to somebody who's literally just trying to immigrate to a new land to start a better life for them and their family. So they thought that moving to this new land would create a lot of new opportunities and experiences. And once they arrived, they realized that there was no great new opportunities. They mostly experienced sickness, unemployment, and death. It was a very hard way of living. And what became difficult is that children, because their parents died or their parents needed to travel to other places to find work, they were given this newfound freedom and independence. This was especially different from the seigneurial system in France, where there was a heavy emphasis on closely monitoring the children and closely mentoring the children to get rid of original sin, or help make sure that these wild children were tamed. There's no longer this oversight of children. In fact, children were often required to participate in the fur trade to help earn income. And this meant that they would be engaging in adult-like behaviors such as drinking. So when parents were dying or literally abandoning their children, these children were forced to take care of themselves. So they're no longer submitting to the authority of parents. They're not going to church, they're not listening to church. Instead, really what's going on is that parents are now dependent on children for their labor. And they're often not working together. They're out trapping furs, they're moving across different locations or geographic regions. So what did agrarian societies in Canada look like? So looking before 1867 being when Canada became officially a country. So people lived in very small rural areas, dependent on farming resources, basically required extraction from the land, which were to earn a livelihood, so physical labor was paramount. This is a cotton field sort of in the United States, but what it does is it shows kind of how children lived in this agrarian society, where they're maybe not even attending school, they are working in the fields with family. Post-Confederation in Canada, we begin to see a shift towards an industrial society where it's production-based. So goods are being produced not for the family unit or not for sale at particular markets, but for like wholesale sale. The nuclear family is still really important at this time. Patriarchal societal structures still exist. And the church continues to have some influence, but that influence is declining, especially in terms of a direct influence. It's no longer, like there are no longer schools run solely by the church. Because of the need to operate machinery, we see the need for specialized skills and training. And remember, this training often requires the ability to understand and retain complex information, or even the ability to read. I'm not saying that having kids work in fields for 18 hours a day, 16 hours a day, 12 hours a day, whatever, was a good thing. But what it did do was give them something to do, something to work at, and be under the supervision of adults. I'm not saying that children didn't work in these factories, but it took some time before they could be working in these factories. And what that meant was that they could be out in the streets or unmonitored by parents at that time. We also begin to see the creation of cities. The geographical regions become more urban, more condensed. And this is where people begin to recognize poverty and recognize delinquency. When they were living so far apart, these things weren't recognized. Furthermore, I'll talk about this later, but we begin to see 24-hour industries, whereas factories could be open the entire day, the entire night. Prior to this, working on the farm when there's no electricity, things would shut down after 5, 6, 7 o'clock. And what this means is that people were not out and about as often. They would leave the farm and they would be confined to their homes. Now we see people out at all hours of the day, all hours of the night, and people begin to witness what's actually going on outside of daylight hours and beginning to realize that there's crime, that there is delinquent behavior going on. Once again, just like the agrarian societies, we see a failure to distinguish really between children and adults. Here we see kids working in coal mines dressed like adults doing the same type of job as adults. Similarly, again, it took some time for kids to move into factories, but once they did, they were treated just like adults. You can see a girl here standing on like a soapbox or something like that to be able to reach the sewing machine. So they're doing the exact same type of job as adults. There were some fairly major consequences to children that came from industrialization. So one was that families were deserted. Children were brought over, like they were even sent from Europe to Canada specifically to work, and they were taken advantage of by employers. This created an industry of prostitution in Canada. We saw social conditions result in the decrease of legal rights for young persons. So there was no like social safety net in the settling of Canada by Europeans. There was no like government, there were no clear court systems, or there were kangaroo courts. So it was very easy to take advantage of children during this time, especially because there was not necessarily any parents looking out to monitor or watch out for them. So many social reformers saw the causes of juvenile crime as being the result of immorality. So there was nobody there to teach them the right types of behaviors. So this is what led to the creation of reformatory schools, where children were housed in these like orphanages or group homes so that they could be taught moral behavior. So this delinquent behavior was a social welfare problem. These individuals were living in poverty as a result of the loss of agrarian roots. And here's where we see the classic, our generation was never this bad mindset. And we see this throughout history.